Around the year 2350 BCE, long before the rise of the Assyrian and Babylonian empires, the sacred lands of Mesopotamia were governed not by emperors, but by the gods themselves. Each city was sacred ground, guarded by its patron deity, Enlil in Nippur, Enki in Eridu, Nannar in Uruk, and Utu in Sippar. Power was distributed across this divine grid, balanced through sacred laws, priesthoods, and ancestral kingship. No single god dared to disturb this order, until Inanna did. As guardian of Uruk, Inanna's domain was beauty, passion, war, and cosmic disruption. While cities honored tradition, she sought transformation. The fragmented reign of Sumer's city-states left the region vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, Inanna saw opportunity. It was during this time of divine diffusion, before the rise of Assyria, before the might of Babylon, that Inanna chose a man of no known father, a gardener, a cupbearer, a future king. This marked the beginning of something never before seen, a unified empire, led not by ancestral mandate, but by divine seduction and selection. The Sumerian gods had created kings, but now Inanna would create an empire. What followed was not merely a change of rulers, it was a realignment of heaven and earth, a challenge to the old order, and a prelude to the storms that would come. Inanna, later known throughout Mesopotamia as Ishtar, was not born into power, nor did she arrive with the first Anunnaki descent to Earth from the planet of the gods. She was not counted among the original command circle, who established dominion during the early stages of Earth colonization. Yet, through calculated ambition, sensual diplomacy, and martial resolve, Inanna ascended to a position of extraordinary authority within the Divine Council. Her status was not a result of lineage, it was forged in the fire of loss, conflict, and resurrection. Two critical events catalyzed her rise. The first was the mysterious and sudden death of her consort, Dumuzi, a divine shepherd figure revered in Sumerian hymns. The second was the imprisonment of Marduk, Dumuzi's elder brother and political rival. These twin events destabilized the balance of power within the Anunnaki pantheon. Inanna, by confronting and outmaneuvering one of the most formidable gods, emerged as a force no longer constrained by ancestral boundaries. At this point, the question was not if she would rule, but where her domain would be established. One of the most revealing records of this moment is preserved in the text known as Inanna's Descent to the Lower World. In this ancient drama, Inanna descends into the underworld, Kur, a domain governed by her sister Ereshkigal and her consort Nergal. Though the official reason for her descent is tied to Dumuzi's funeral, many scholars suspect a deeper political agenda beneath the ritual. The underworld was not simply a realm of the dead, but a strategic stronghold of the Anunnaki's southern territories, potentially located in the mineral-rich regions of southern Africa, long associated with early extractive operations directed by the gods. Before her descent, she received stern warnings from Enki, Enlil, and Nannar, pillars of the divine hierarchy. Those are the so-called Emi. These were not gestures of concern, they were proclamations of risk and consequence. Inanna, however, pressed forward, leaving explicit instructions to her servant Ninshubur. If she failed to return, the alarm was to be sounded in the heavens. Her descent was marked by ritualistic disarmament. At each of the 7 gates of Kur, she surrendered an emblem of power, crown, scepter, breastplate, and more. This was not mere ceremony. These objects embodied the Emi, the divine decrees that governed civilization, law, fertility, and warfare. Stripped of these, Inanna entered the underworld not as a goddess, but as a supplicant. Her arrival sparked alarm. Ereshkigal, perceiving threat rather than kinship, summoned a tribunal of 7 Anunnaki judges. Their verdict was swift and harsh. Inanna was struck down, her body suspended and her essence removed. she became a corpse. Though the tablets are silent on the tribunal's full reasoning, the context reveals a profound political undercurrent. Inanna's actions may have echoed a principle found later in the Torah, specifically in Deuteronomy 25, where the law of levirate marriage, the yibum, commands a man to marry his deceased brother's widow to preserve lineage. With Dumuzi dead and Marduk imprisoned, Inanna's potential union with Nergal could have served to consolidate divine power and produce a legitimate heir with authority over the underworld and its territories. This maneuver, if successful, would not only rival Ereshkigal's rule, but potentially absorb it. But Ereshkigal preempted the move. By eliminating Inanna, she cut off any path to such legitimacy. Yet Inanna was not without powerful allies. Enki, god of wisdom and the deep waters, intervened. He sent 2 emissaries fashioned from clay, beings neither male nor female, to retrieve her. They carried tools that pulse and radiate, and administered substances described as the water of life and the food of life. The details of this restoration evoke profound parallels with later resurrection narratives, particularly in the prophetic visions of Ezekiel, where dry bones are revived through the breath of Elohim. Inanna was not merely healed, she was reborn. Upon her return to the surface, Inanna did not immediately re-enter the courts of divine politics. Instead, she retreated to a place near the Euphrates, tending to a sacred tree believed to be the Hulupu tree, a symbol of life, stability, and future kingship. Her lamentations speak of longing for a sanctuary, a throne, and the fulfillment of a destiny. Support came from an unexpected source. Anu, supreme ruler of the Anunnaki and Inanna's great-grandfather, welcomed her not with rebuke but with elevation. During an encounter in the celestial realm, he conferred upon her the title Anunitum, beloved of Anu. This was no mere term of endearment. In Anunnaki politics, such designations marked territory, autonomy, and divine sanction. But the question of location remained unresolved. Africa was sealed. The underworld was now firmly in Ereshkigal's control. The lands of Enki and Enlil were locked within family structures. Mesopotamia, meanwhile, had become a mosaic of city-states already aligned to various deities. A new frontier was necessary. Archaeological and mythological timelines converge on a moment of opportunity. The events surrounding Dumuzi's death and Marduk's exile likely occurred after the rise of urban centers in Sumer, around 3800 BCE. Egyptian chronology, preserved by Manetho, records a 350-year interregnum before the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, around 3100 BCE. This window of chaos and shifting power may reflect the same cosmic upheaval found in Sumerian narratives. It was during this transitional age that a third center of power emerged, the Indus Valley. Suddenly, cities appeared with advanced sanitation, standardized weights, and urban planning, hints of Anunnaki engineering. Inanna, now mythically resurrected and politically legitimized, was poised to lay claim. Her descent then was not only a ritual ordeal, it was a coup thwarted, a bold claim denied, but ultimately a transformation achieved. She returned not merely as a goddess, but as a living myth, one whose authority derived not only from Anu's favor, but from surviving death itself. And though she had yet to seize a throne, Inanna was no longer a claimant among many. She had become a force capable of shaping empires. Her rise had just begun. The civilization established was probably what came to be known as the Third Region, modern-day Indus Valley, did not endure as long as the divine centers of Mesopotamia or Egypt. Its historical footprint, though immense in sophistication, was comparatively brief. Lasting roughly a millennium, this advanced urban complex began to unravel around 1600 BCE. Cities were abandoned, water systems decayed, and populations either migrated or assimilated into neighboring territories. Over the centuries, floods, tectonic shifts, and human disruption obliterated its memory. The sacred knowledge and architecture that once defined it were buried, both by soil and by time. The rediscovery of this forgotten civilization began in the early 20th century. British-led excavations, especially under Sir Mortimer Wheeler in the 1920s, unearthed ruins along nearly 400 miles of the Indus River basin. Two principal cities emerged, Harappa in the north and Mohenjo-Daro in the south. These were not scattered villages. They were massive urban centers spanning over 3 miles each and exhibiting signs of centralized planning and divine oversight. Both cities were encircled by high outer walls, while inner zones were divided with remarkable symmetry. The construction relied on sun-dried clay and baked mud bricks, identical to materials found in ancient Sumerian and Akkadian sites. This architectural parallel reveals not only shared techniques, but potentially shared directives from the same celestial architects. At the heart of each city stood an elevated citadel, oriented on a precise north-south axis. These citadels housed the principal temples, administrative halls, and ceremonial platforms, suggesting that, like in Sumer, political and religious functions were inseparable. Such alignment reflects not mere aesthetics, but a worldview aligned with heavenly order, echoing the biblical pattern seen in the tabernacle's design, which Moses constructed according to the pattern shown on the mountain, believed to be a reflection of divine geometry. Granaries uncovered in both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were vast and centralized, far exceeding local needs. This indicates grain was not merely for sustenance, but functioned as a currency of control, tribute, or export. In the Torah, Joseph's role in Egypt similarly involved vast granaries as a mechanism of political power under divine instruction. Strikingly, the early buildings of Mohenjo-Daro utilized timber reinforcement, a method poorly suited to the humid and flood-prone environment. This approach was quickly abandoned, implying the earliest engineers arrived with knowledge tailored to different terrains. The evidence suggests relocation, possibly of Anunnaki-guided architects or priest-kings, rather than indigenous innovation. Material culture in the Indus mirrors Mesopotamian sophistication. Sewage systems, bead crafting, metallurgy, and standardized weights and measures all match Sumerian precedents. Even decorative motifs such as rosettes, serpentine figures, and celestial crosses recur. The most significant among them, the 8-pointed star, or Mesopotamian cross, is believed to signify Nibiru, the planetary origin of the Anunnaki. This symbol's recurrence in both Indus and Sumer links the two not just in trade, but in spiritual governance. This raises a profound question: which divine authority presided over this distant, refined civilization? Despite the undeciphered writing of the Indus script, iconographic remains offer clues. Numerous female figurines, often adorned with headgear and posture evocative of Mesopotamian depictions of Inanna, known later as Ishtar, appear throughout excavation sites. Seals show horned crowns, the unmistakable mark of divinity in Anunnaki symbolism. These elements point to the veneration of Inanna as the dominant force within the third region. This aligns with the division of territories documented in both Sumerian tablets and biblical echoes of divine inheritance. Just as in Deuteronomy says that Elion divided the nations and set boundaries according to the number of the sons of Elohim, the gods of Mesopotamia divided earth into domains. In the aftermath of violent rivalries, Dumuzi's death, Marduk's imprisonment, Inanna's ambitions were thwarted in Africa and Mesopotamia. The Indus Valley became her inheritance. Further confirmation arises in a lesser-known Sumerian text, Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta. This tale centers on the rise of Uruk and portrays Inanna as the spiritual force behind its expansion. It also references an eastern land of immense wealth and craftsmanship, Aratta, which scholars speculate could represent the Indus Valley. The narrative highlights tension and diplomacy between Uruk and Aratta, suggesting cultural interaction and divine orchestration. Moreover, the wealth of gems, the prominence of lapis lazuli, and fine metallurgy in the Indus region reflect what Inanna was often associated with, not only beauty and love, but the refinement of civilization itself. These traits are echoed in Ezekiel's vision of Tyre, where the prophet describes celestial trade and divine beings involved in commerce, drawing a parallel between ancient cities and their cosmic overseers. Thus, the rise of the third region was not accidental. It was planned, a strategic redirection of divine energies and resources. Inanna, resurrected and endorsed by Anu, became not only a political force but a divine archetype of rebirth, expansion, and disruption. Her domain was re-established far from opposition, in a land suited to her gifts. Its sudden collapse remains a mystery. But like Babel's unfinished tower, the fall of the Indus cities may reflect divine judgment, internal rebellion, or cosmic realignment. The third region was an extension of the divine experiment, a civilization constructed by decree, infused with technology and spiritual codes, then veiled for millennia. Ancient texts refer to a mysterious land known as Aratta, placing it beyond the eastern mountain ranges, southeast of ancient Iran, precisely in the region that aligns with what would later become the Indus Valley. Descriptions of Aratta include large grain storage systems and an abundance of naturally growing wheat and beans, all prepared for trade. These features closely resemble what archaeologists have uncovered in cities like Harappa, leading to the hypothesis that Harappa may in fact preserve the memory of Aratta, whether through linguistic evolution or geographic inheritance. The narrative that connects Aratta to Mesopotamian history centers around Enmerkar, a key figure listed in the Sumerian king lists as one of the early builders and rulers of Uruk, the biblical Eric. His lineage is described as originating from a demigod, a child of the sun god Utu or Shamash, and a human woman, who ruled as both high priest and king. Around 2900 BCE, Enmerkar succeeded his father and transformed Uruk from a minor settlement into a true center of divine presence and political power. At the heart of this transformation was Inanna. Although Anu, the sky god, was officially linked to Uruk, he resided elsewhere. Enmerkar recognized that divine authority needed to be embodied in the city. His solution was to invite Inanna to make Uruk her permanent seat of power. He expanded the Inanna temple, originally dedicated to Anu, to honor Inanna, creating a permanent divine dwelling that mirrored the grandeur she commanded. To furnish the temple, Enmerkar turned to Aratta. He initially requested rare materials, precious stones, metals, lapis lazuli, and master artisans capable of working gold and silver to divine specifications. These demands were presented as offerings, gifts intended to glorify Inanna's temple and secure her loyalty to Uruk. But the situation changed when Aratta, suffering from a severe drought, complied. Recognizing the kingdom's vulnerability, Enmerkar escalated his position. His next message demanded submission. Aratta was no longer just a supplier of sacred goods. It was expected to bow to Uruk's authority. Enmerkar sent multiple messengers, each bearing increasingly direct and aggressive messages. Historians, including Samuel Noah Kramer, have called this episode the earliest recorded instance of psychological warfare. The messengers delivered threats of destruction and chaos should Aratta resist. Aratta's response was clever. The ruler claimed to no longer understand Sumerian, referencing the linguistic confusion that, according to tradition, had spread after the fall of the Tower of Babel. This delayed the confrontation and forced Enmerkar to adopt a new approach. His next message came written on clay, using Arata's own language, a gesture of both dominance and diplomacy. This inscription was reportedly made with the help of Nidaba, the goddess of writing. Along with it, Enmerkar sent seeds from Anu's temple as a gesture of goodwill, offering a path to recovery from the drought. Implicit in this message was a deeper belief that Inanna herself favored Arata's allegiance to Uruk, and that divine order was shifting. When Arata's ruler received the tablet, he examined the unfamiliar writing, described in the text as resembling small nails, an early depiction of cuneiform. Faced with growing pressure, he found himself at a crossroads: surrender his independence or continue to resist Uruk's rising dominance. At that moment, an unexpected event altered the course of the conflict. A powerful storm struck the region. The drought ended. Rain fell over Arata's mountains and plains, restoring the land's fertility. The fields flourished, and agricultural abundance returned. Interpreting this as a sign of divine favor, the ruler of Arata rejected Enmerkar's demands and declared that Inanna had not abandoned Arata. This decision, however, did not permanently resolve the tension. The text indicates that Inanna began to divide her time between the two cities. While she maintained her divine identity in Arata, she also resided in Uruk, where her newly built temple reflected the grandeur expected of a supreme goddess. This dual presence allowed her to remain connected to both territories. The means of her travel is described in vivid terms. Inanna journeyed between cities using her boat of heaven, a celestial vessel portrayed in ancient iconography as capable of flight. Some records claim that she piloted the craft herself, while others suggest she had a designated navigator, as was common among the leading Anunnaki. In Sumerian tradition, these divine pilots were known as Abgal, celestial ferrymen who operated the gods' airborne transports. Inanna's pilot was identified as Nungal, described as strong-hearted and skilled in aerial navigation. In later inscriptions, Nungal is credited as the one who brought Inanna from the skies to the temple in Uruk. This entire episode, Enmerkar's campaign, Arata's resistance, and Inanna's movement between divine centers, reflects a larger narrative of shifting power and divine strategy. Uruk's rise was not only political, but symbolic. The presence of Inanna, once fully associated with a distant eastern realm, was now central to Mesopotamia's identity. Her alignment with Uruk elevated its legitimacy, while her connection to Arata preserved its sacred lineage. The result was a new balance: two cities, one goddess, and a divine mobility that transcended borders, languages, and even atmospheric limitations. The legacy of Arata did not vanish. It became part of a larger mythos, one that fused the East with the West and placed Inanna at the center of an emerging world order. Throughout this transformative moment, another element held extraordinary importance: the divine technologies known as Emi. These sacred objects or codes were believed to govern aspects of civilization: law, kingship, warfare, and even the arts. Possession of the Emi meant control over the functions of society itself. Inanna, in her ambition to dominate Uruk's destiny, sought access to these divine decrees. She journeyed to Eridu, the domain of Enki, where many of the Emi were stored. This pilgrimage marked a decisive moment in the redistribution of power across the Anunnaki pantheon. The acquisition of the Emi not only reinforced Inanna's sovereignty, but also linked Uruk to a broader cosmic system of authority. Each city-state had once held specific Emi, reflecting its divine specialization. By collecting and centralizing these sacred elements, Inanna transformed Uruk into a hub of divine convergence, a city no longer just under the guidance of one deity, but one infused with multiple streams of divine function. With Inanna as its anchor, Uruk emerged as a prototype of unified empire, a place where divine favor, political command, sacred technology, and celestial transportation coalesced. What began as a campaign between two lands evolved into a paradigm shift in divine governance, one that would echo through centuries of kingship, priesthood, and myth. After the Great Flood, the Sumerian records, particularly the Sumerian king list, trace a deliberate handover of kingship, one that moved like a torch of authority from one sacred site to another. The first post-Diluvian seat of rulership was established in Kish, a city that rose amidst the drying floodwaters as a beacon of divine reorganization. Yet this was not to remain the permanent center. The locus of power eventually shifted to Erech, later known by its Akkadian name, Uruk. This transition wasn't merely administrative. It marked a reconfiguration of divine favor and human governance. Archaeological evidence supports this evolution. Uruk's rise was not immediate. At its core stood a solitary, elevated structure, a ziggurat-like platform with a gleaming temple dedicated to the sky god Anu. Known today as the White Temple, it crowned a high terrace, visible from miles across the floodplain. Unlike other early Sumerian cities, Uruk was not founded for commerce or conquest. It began as a shrine, a heavenly contact point between realms. The very soil beneath it, pressed and layered by Anunnaki engineers, functioned as a foundation for what would become the world's first metropolis. Millennia later, excavations revealed the bones of that sacred complex: early walls, ceremonial ramps, and multi-level foundations. The layout, its perfect alignment with celestial coordinates, and the sophistication of its drainage and storage systems all suggest that the builders were not experimenting. They were executing a plan with precision. Among the later ruins, a second monumental temple emerged, built in reverence to Inanna. Dated to the early 3rd millennium BCE, this temple aligned with the timeline of Enmerkar, the king-priest of Uruk and grandson of Utu Shamash. The grandeur of Inanna's temple complex, known as the Inanna precinct, was unrivaled. It was said to be adorned with lapis lazuli shining like the sky, echoing hymns that described her sanctuary as a celestial mirror on earth. But as majestic as it was, Uruk lacked one essential element: the me. In the oldest narratives, the Emi is more than a divine decree. It is the codex of civilization, a set of metaphysical programs written into reality. Each Emi was a bearer of cosmic order, not just rules or knowledge, but the very functions by which society, power, and consciousness operated. Modern scholars have compared the Emi to blueprints, data tablets, or sacred protocols, functioning both as religious icons and as operational tools of the gods. They were not scattered randomly. Their release followed a divine timeline, managed exclusively by Enki, the god of wisdom, science, subterranean waters, and the secrets hidden beneath creation. He was the archivist of the Anunnaki, guardian of the Abzu, and original possessor of all Emi. Cities that possessed even a fragment of the Emi catalog became dominant centers of power. They birthed law codes, priesthoods, rituals, and bureaucracies. These weren't mere cultural expressions, they were functional activations of encoded roles. At this critical junction, Uruk remained symbolically potent, but politically subordinate. It carried sacred architecture, but not the command codes. Inanna, the goddess of war, love, and dominion, refused to accept this imbalance. She moved to accelerate the divine timetable. The oldest known literary description of this shift comes from the myth known as Inanna and Enki, the transfer of the Emi, a document preserved on clay tablets and translated by scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer. In this myth, Inanna departs from Uruk aboard her boat of heaven, a vessel described with aerial characteristics gliding between realms. Her destination, the Abzu, Enki's subterranean fortress, described as both watery and radiant, a place of bright chambers and gleaming lapis. Upon her arrival, Enki welcomed her as kin. A grand feast was prepared, abundant with bread, dates, and sweet, intoxicating wine. Toasts were made and honors exchanged. But beneath the hospitality lay a deeper strategy. Inanna, ever cunning, guided the conversation toward the Emi. As the night deepened and Enki's mood softened under the influence of wine, he began granting her access, not to one, but to more than 90 individual MEs, each a pillar of power. Among them were the ME for kingship, high priesthood, war strategy, divine judgment, music, craftsmanship, the scribal arts, weapon forging, and temple construction. Inanna didn't seize them by force. She accepted them as gifts, sealed through ritual and libation. When morning broke and the effects of the wine subsided, Enki realized the magnitude of his actions. The Emi had been transferred, officially, and in public ceremony. Alarmed, he summoned his vizier and issued orders to recover them before they could be permanently installed in Uruk. But Inanna was already in the air, her celestial vessel slicing through the winds, piloted by her loyal Abgal. The myth mentions that 7 waves of emissaries were sent to intercept her, each more desperate than the last. All failed. Each time, Inanna's ship evaded their grasp, protected by her authority, her pilot's navigation, and the legitimacy of the ritual exchange. Upon her return, the Emi were housed in Uruk's sanctum. Rituals were performed. High priests consecrated their arrival. Civilizational roles began to blossom. Urban planning, metallurgy, sacred marriage rites, scribal schools, all emerging in structured sequence. From this moment, Uruk ceased to be merely sacred. It became sovereign. This event transformed Inanna from a powerful regional deity into a civilizational architect. She did not rise by inheritance nor conquest. She claimed tools, activated codes, and rewrote the political topology of Sumer. The symbolic message was clear. Divine power was no longer bound to bloodlines or waiting for consensus. It could be activated by initiative, intelligence, and the courage to act outside protocol. The Emi, once protected in the vaults of Enki, now pulsed at the heart of Uruk. And from there, the world began to change. Inanna had crossed boundaries no other god dared to breach. Between domains, between power and access, between the present and the future. She embodied the archetype of the disruptor, the divine strategist, the one who initiates a new age by seizing what was once restricted. And Uruk, carrying the weight of the Emi, became the prototype of all future empires. In the city of Erech, or Uruk, the ascent of Inanna into the highest spheres of divine authority was not merely noted, it was celebrated, institutionalized, and ritualized. Her rise became one of the defining features of Uruk's identity. What had begun as a sacred precinct dedicated to Anu was now transforming into a civilizational heart, shaped by the political theology of Inanna. The people of Uruk, known in the ancient tablets as the Black-Headed People or the Sumerians themselves, responded not passively, but with devotion and public proclamation. Their reverence was expressed through hymns, temple festivals, priestly rites, and civic gatherings. Among these, a composition later titled The Exaltation of Inanna stands out, not as mythology, but as communal liturgical memory. It was recited aloud by priests and citizens alike, functioning as a religious oath, historical record, and political declaration. Central to this proclamation was the acknowledgement that Inanna held the Emi, the sacred instruments encoding the structures of civilization. Her rise was not attributed solely to lineage, though she was descended from important celestial bloodlines. It was acknowledged because she possessed the operational codes of divine order. Her tiara symbolized sovereignty. Her vestments symbolized ritual authority. Her role in temple structure symbolized legitimacy. The hymns made it clear her rule was earned, witnessed by the heavens, and ratified by cosmic law. This formal recognition signaled a shift in divine administration. Inanna was now counted among the 12 great deities, a governing assembly responsible for the sacred management of both heaven and earth. With this appointment, she replaced the older Earth Mother, Ninharsag, also known as Ninmah, marking a generational transition from primordial creation to civilizational direction. Her elevation was reflected not only in earthly temples, but also in the heavens. Inanna became linked to the celestial body known today as Venus, recorded in Sumerian star texts as Muldabat, the radiant morning and evening star. Its behavior, disappearing, descending, reappearing, was interpreted as mirroring her descent to the underworld and resurrection. Her zodiacal signature was mapped to the constellation later known as Virgo, previously marked in Sumerian astronomical tablets as Absin. Remarkably, the symbol of a divine feminine figure holding an ear of grain has survived nearly unchanged across civilizations, from Sumer to Babylon, from Babylon to Greece, and from Greece into modern astronomy. Inanna's response to this cosmic coronation was bold and unmistakable. She proclaimed herself queen of heaven, of earth, and of all domains entrusted to her name. But her elevation did not end with celestial symbolism. It now moved into the most crucial arena of ancient civilization: human governance. Inanna's authority extended into matters of justice, law, and fate. Ancient hymns describe how the population gathered after the harvest season to present disputes before her temple through the priesthood, appealing for judicial guidance. She was remembered not as a passive receiver of worship, but as a decisive arbiter, rewarding righteousness and dismantling corruption. Her youthful radiance was admired, but it was her strategic intelligence, martial confidence, and spiritual force that defined her rule. As Uruk expanded culturally and economically, Inanna instituted one of the most important rituals of Mesopotamian religion, the sacred marriage rite. This transformative ceremony united the mortal king with the goddess in symbolic union. It was agricultural, political, and theological all at once. The king's legitimacy depended on his role as Inanna's chosen consort, not by birthright, but by divine acknowledgement. Later on, the sacred marriage rite would become a symbol of divine masculine and divine feminine association, culminating in the traditions of Samhain and Beltane, which in turn have become the celebration of the new year of Celtic tradition, which is the Halloween. Later associations can be found in esoteric and occultist traditions, and even in mysticism evolving to the union of the opposites, and even to the archetypal and mystical image of the Vesica Pisces, which in turn has some relations to Jesus Christ, the Logos, and the alchemical image of the Son of the divine marriage. One of the most detailed accounts of this rite comes from a narrative attributed to King Idundagan. The ritual unfolded with music, harps, lyres, drums, and priestly choreography. A remarkable feature was the presence of gender-fluid temple performers, reflecting Inanna's dominion over love, identity, fertility, and the boundary between masculine and feminine. Their garments combined male and female elements, symbolizing Inanna's ability to dissolve division and restore unity. At the culmination of the ritual, a consecrated bed was prepared with oils and incense. The king entered and, according to the ancient narrative, was affirmed by Inanna as beloved. The union symbolized cosmic harmony, linking heaven, earth, human flesh, and divine decree. Inanna's influence over rulership was not symbolic, it was direct. She appears to have selected Lugalbanda as Enmerkar's successor. Ancient texts refer to Lugalbanda as divine and righteous, suggesting that his kingship was not merely inherited, it was sanctioned, perhaps initiated by Inanna herself. His role stretched beyond governance. His stories describe journeys into forbidden places, including Mount Hurum, referred to as the Restricted Mount, a site associated with subterranean activity and Anunnaki engineering. There, Lugalbanda encountered a guardian and sought access to the divine blackbird, described as a being capable of flight and guidance. His plea, recorded in ancient verse, reveals humanity's early longing to transcend earthly limits, to join the gods in the skies. His story blurs the line between human and divine, echoing a pattern found later in texts associated with Elohim, Yahweh, and the Nephilim, where divine beings interact with mortals, shape destinies, and ignite civilizations. In the narrative traditions of Sumer, not all figures who sought divine ascent were gods. Some emerged from a mixed lineage, part mortal, part divine, and carried within themselves the ambition to transcend both realms. One of the most prominent among them was Lugalbanda, a name that would endure as the second great king of Uruk, succeeding Enmerkar in the dynastic line. Lugalbanda's aspiration extended beyond kingship. The ancient texts suggest that his desire to fly was not merely poetic or metaphorical. He is described as seeking physical access to a divine craft referred to as the Bird of Heaven. This object was kept in a highly restricted region known as Mount Hurum, a sacred location sealed by Enlil and described in mythic terms as a closed mountain, a place with subterranean structures where the Anunnaki were said to tunnel and operate beneath the surface. The characterization of this region as both sacred and sealed indicates its connection to forbidden knowledge and divine technology. At the threshold of Mount Hurum, Lugalbanda was met by a guardian figure. The question posed to him was absolute: divine or mortal? If divine, he would be granted passage. If mortal, his life could end at the gate. In response, Lugalbanda did not cite miracles or credentials, but instead invoked lineage. He claimed to be the beloved of Inanna and aligned himself with the category of divine sons. Although his paternal origin remains obscure in extant records, contextual evidence suggests that he may have been the offspring of Enmerkar, Inanna's consort, and the founder of Uruk's ruling line. The relationship between Inanna and Uruk's kings reveals a broader pattern of divine intervention in human rule. These alliances were not limited to political endorsement. They included ritual unions and dynastic shaping. This divine human bond would reappear in the figure of Gilgamesh, who became the fifth king in the Uruk dynasty. His mother was the goddess Ninsun, and his father a priest of Kulab, a sacred precinct of Uruk. Gilgamesh, like Lugalbanda, carried divine blood, but his journey was defined by the confrontation with mortality. According to the traditions preserved in Mesopotamian literature, Gilgamesh sought to overcome death itself. His journey took him westward toward the Cedar Mountain, an area corresponding to modern-day Lebanon and associated with ancient landing sites used by the gods. During this journey, he encountered an entity described in terms that imply mechanical or artificial origin, possibly an automated guardian of non-human design. This obstacle was only bypassed through the intervention of Utu, the solar deity, who granted access. After his ordeal, Gilgamesh stopped to wash himself. His renewed appearance caught the eye of Inanna, who observed him from her divine realm. Moved by his beauty and strength, she descended with a proposition, offering herself in divine partnership. Her proposal included promises of power and exaltation. Gilgamesh refused. He did not deny her status. Instead, he recalled her previous consorts and the tragic fates they had endured, Dumuzi among others, whose relationships with her ended in destruction. Gilgamesh feared that he too would be discarded after serving her desire. His rejection sparked divine fury. Inanna sought vengeance and petitioned Anu, the sovereign of the heavens, for permission to release the Bull of Heaven. The bull descended upon Uruk in a wave of destruction. Yet Gilgamesh and his close companion Enkidu stood together and killed the beast. Their success came at a cost, provoking divine anger and bringing consequences to Enkidu. But Gilgamesh's survival positioned him as one of the only mortals to defy a deity and live. Despite the symbolic power of this era, the golden age of Uruk was entering decline. After Gilgamesh, 7 kings are listed as successors in the Sumerian king list, yet none achieved the mythic stature of their predecessors. Authority began to fracture. According to the reconstruction of Thorkild Jacobsen, around 2850 BCE, central authority shifted from Uruk to Ur. Some alternate chronologies suggest this change may have occurred closer to 2650 BCE. The discrepancy reflects unresolved gaps in the chronology of Sumerian kingship. As central power disintegrated, the political structure of Sumer grew unstable. Rival cities, Kish, Mari, Adabi, Hamazi, and others, took turns asserting dominance. The duration of reigns shortened, conflicts intensified, and essential resources, especially water from the canals and rivers, became sites of dispute. Population growth, environmental strain, and theological rivalries contributed to widespread fragmentation. During this time, the gods did not remain passive. The people intensified their appeals for divine intervention. Temples overflowed with offerings. Rulers aligned with particular deities to legitimize their authority. Shamash was invoked for justice, Nannar for wisdom, Enlil for order, and Ninurta for military power. But the divine order itself seemed divided. Echoes of earlier divine discontent, such as Enlil's rage at human defiance in the Great Flood or the episode at Babel, resurfaced in new tensions between the gods and the cities. Efforts to restore unity centered around Kish, traditionally seen as the seat of divine kingship. Yet its kings proved ineffective. One figure, Nannar, is recorded only as a stonecutter, an indication of how far the prestige of the throne had fallen. The political instability reflected a deeper fracture in divine authority. In this atmosphere of disorder, Inanna acted once more. She selected Lugalzagesi as her new instrument of restoration. Under her guidance, he ruled for 25 years and launched a campaign to re-establish Uruk's supremacy. He attacked Kish and achieved temporary success. However, his rise provoked the ire of other gods. No longer would the divine realm allow one city or one priesthood to dominate. A more neutral figure was required. Someone capable of balancing competing divine interests and uniting humanity under a broader spiritual mandate. The collapse of Uruk's influence, the inability of any one city to maintain stable kingship, and the increasing complexity of divine politics marked the end of Sumer's first epic. The era of sacred unions and symbolic rule gave way to warfare, territorial ambition, and divine withdrawal. The open presence of the gods among mortals faded. Their involvement grew distant. The voice of the divine became harder to hear. And the age that had begun with Inanna's rise and the kingship of Enmerkar drew to a solemn close. Around the mid-3rd millennium BCE, amid shifting allegiances and fragile alliances among the city-states of Sumer, a new force emerged. One not born of royal lineage nor temple priesthood, but of an origin shrouded in secrecy and divine orchestration. This force would reshape the map of Mesopotamia and usher in the age of empire. Its name, Sargon, Sharu Kin, the legitimate king. Sargon's rise defied every established expectation of kingship. He was not born into the palace courts of Ur or Kish. Instead, tradition places his early life in obscurity. Ancient inscriptions record that his mother was a high priestess, bound by sacred vows that forbade public acknowledgement of her child. His father's identity remains unrecorded, lost to time, or veiled deliberately. The child, placed in a woven basket sealed with bitumen, was set adrift upon the river, a ritual of abandonment that echoes with cosmic symbolism. But the waters did not consume him. He was rescued by Aki, an irrigator, who raised the boy as his own. This humble beginning placed the future king not in royal halls, but among gardens and canals. As a gardener, he learned patience, balance, and timing, skills that would later serve him on the battlefield and in matters of state. Yet no ordinary gardener ascends to become sovereign of all Sumer and beyond. The transformation required an event beyond human architecture, and that event came in the form of a descent. According to ancient traditions, the goddess Inanna, known as Ishtar in later Akkadian contexts, undertook a journey across the lands east of Sumer, including regions such as Elam and Subartu. These cosmic voyages, whether literal or symbolic, placed her above the sphere of ordinary mortals. But at a moment of exhaustion or divine contemplation, she descended near the place where Sargon tended his garden. Their encounter was not random. It was part of a larger design, a celestial directive manifesting through terrestrial means. Inanna observed the young man and was moved, not merely by appearance or charisma, but by what he carried within. Sargon was not chosen because of who he was. He was chosen because of what he could become under divine guidance. Their union, interpreted through sacred lens, was an act of elevation. It fused the earthbound servant to the divine principle of sovereignty. Inanna did not merely bless him, she claimed him. And in doing so, she redefined the very process of kingship. From that moment forward, Sargon's path changed. He entered service at the royal court of Kish, initially as a cupbearer, a trusted position, but far from the throne. Yet Inanna's favor followed him. When the political structure of Kish collapsed, Sargon emerged as a stabilizing force. He led a coalition of cities, subdued rivals, and eventually established a new capital, Akkad, later known as Akkad. The name itself, Agade, united, signaled his intention to unify not only territory, but language, culture, and divine mandate. The rise of Akkad under Sargon was more than geopolitical. It marked a civilizational pivot. The Sumerian tongue gave way to Akkadian, a Semitic language that would dominate the region for centuries and serve as the medium of law, diplomacy, and divine communication. Clay tablets bearing Akkadian script would travel from the Indus Valley to Anatolia, from Canaan to the mountains of Iran, carrying not only commerce, but worldview. Sargon ruled for 54 years. His dominion stretched from the lower sea to the upper sea, often interpreted as the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. His military campaigns extended far into Elam, Mari, Ebla, and possibly beyond. Yet, ancient accounts emphasize not only conquest, but divine authorization. The period of his reign is remembered as the era of Ishtar, a time in which opposition was said to vanish before him, not merely through force, but through the divine aura projected by his patron goddess. The chronicles suggest that Sargon did not act alone. His victories were orchestrated, his movements calculated by a higher intelligence. Inanna stood not beside his throne but above it, her symbols carried into battle, her temples erected at the heart of the new empire. Through him, she extended her reach across Sumer and into lands never before touched by her cult. This pattern of a deity selecting a ruler, empowering him with divine tools, and shaping the course of civilization repeats throughout Mesopotamian history. But in Sargon's case, it took on imperial scale. He was not merely a king among kings. He was the first to bind disparate territories under one crown, to institutionalize divine kingship across languages, cities, and races. The transformation was irreversible. After Sargon, kingship would never again be a matter solely of blood or heritage. It became a conduit for divine will, a mantle conferred by the gods, and by Inanna above all. The emergence of Akkad was not a replacement of Sumer, it was its evolution. The rites, symbols, and codes once confined to temple precincts were now projected onto the world stage. Inanna, once sovereign of Uruk, now became the architect of empires. And Sargon, her chosen vessel, stood as the prototype of all who would follow. The period remembered as the Era of Ishtar was not simply an epic of military brilliance, it was a calculated convergence of spiritual hierarchy and imperial ambition. It represented a moment when divine will, channeled through Inanna, manifested not only in temples and rituals, but in conquest, diplomacy, and infrastructure. In this alignment, Sargon was not merely a ruler supported by the gods, he was a vessel of Inanna's expansionist vision. The goddess who once ruled only Uruk now extended her dominion across continents, through a king she had chosen, shaped, and deployed. Sargon's campaigns followed a path of deliberate precision. His armies moved from Kish to Uruk, dismantling its ancient walls, symbols of city-state autonomy. Ur was subdued, its lunar cult of Nannar brought under Akkadian oversight. Further south, Lagash capitulated, and the edges of the southern sea were marked by Akkad's banners. Yet the conquests did not end with Sumer. Territories such as Mari in the west and Elam to the east, each with their own pantheons and traditions, were absorbed into a swelling imperial architecture that mirrored the expanding will of Inanna. At the heart of this reconfiguration stood Agade, a city not born of ancestral memory, but of divine inception. More than a political seat, Agade functioned as the spiritual command center of a reimagined cosmos. Its crowning structure was the Temple of Ulmash, erected by Inanna herself. In this temple, she did not merely reside, she ruled. The Ulmash was not one sanctuary among many. It was a declaration of cosmic priority. Agade was now the navel of the sacred world. But Inanna's elevation required institutional consolidation. Divine legitimacy had to be mirrored by celestial endorsement. To this end, Sargon ensured the alignment of his reign with the Upper Trinity, Anu, Enlil, and Inanna. One statue inscription placed within Enlil's temple declared Sargon as overseer of Ishtar, priest of Anu, and servant of Enlil. These titles formed a deliberate theological triangle that secured his sovereignty within the divine bureaucracy. On the battlefield, the invocation of deities was never random. Inanna, patroness of love and war, stood at the center of his campaigns, embodying conquest with intensity and seduction. Yet Enlil was still acknowledged as the adjudicator of outcomes, the one who made kingship descend from heaven. Utu Shamash, god of justice and light, was invoked as the celestial witness of Sargon's decisions, especially in campaigns involving treaties or judgment. This layering of divine support allowed Sargon to present each military act not as ambition, but as execution of a heavenly decree. The territorial scope of the Akkadian Empire reveals another subtle architecture, one informed not only by geography, but by pantheon. Sargon's early campaigns moved first through regions aligned with Nannar, then into zones historically governed by Enlil's cult. His eastward advance into Elam appeared to follow Inanna's own celestial circuits, as reflected in hymns describing her cosmic voyages. In his western expansions, Sargon directed offerings and invocations to Adad, the storm god, whose approval was deemed essential for success in unfamiliar lands. But conspicuously, territories traditionally associated with Enki remained untouched. Tilman, Magan, and Meluha, regions tied to wisdom, water, and the deep arts of creation, were left outside the web of Akkadian conquest. Trade flowed freely between Akkad and these lands, but no military banners were raised. Similarly, Marduk's sphere, centered in Babylon, was not challenged. These omissions were not accidents. They reflected an unspoken accord, perhaps one of avoidance, perhaps one of fear. This restraint, however, began to erode in Sargon's later years. In a move interpreted by later generations as both daring and reckless, he ordered the transplantation of sacred earth from Babylon, soil believed to be imbued with the breath of the gods. He used this soil to lay the foundation of a new spiritual district near Agade. The message was clear. Babylon's ancient power was being drawn into the orbit of the new imperial capital. The act was symbolic colonization, an attempt to hijack sacred geography and redirect its authority. But Babylon was not defenseless. Its tutelary deity, Marduk, had remained passive throughout Sargon's campaigns, maintaining a measured silence. That silence broke, not through war, but through judgment. The chronicles speak of famine, discord, and revolt. Marduk's retribution manifested as disintegration, not just of armies, but of cosmic alignment. The lands that once fell into order now spiraled into rebellion. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Cities once loyal to Akkad declared autonomy. The harmony carefully constructed by Sargon and Inanna began to fray. In his final years, the emperor wandered from city to city, quelling uprisings that never ceased. His decrees no longer carried the weight they once did. The temples still burned incense to Inanna, but their voices were subdued. The empire had become a colossus with cracked foundations. Divine sanction had not been revoked, but it had shifted. Sargon died after 54 years of rule. His tomb, if it was ever built, remains undiscovered. His legacy, however, is carved across time. The first emperor, the chosen of Inanna, the man who redrew the spiritual and political map of the ancient world. Yet his final lesson was clear. Divine favor can lift a king, but even the chosen are accountable to cosmic law. The era of Inanna had reached its zenith. In its brilliance, it illuminated new paths for civilization. In its collapse, it revealed the fragile tension between ambition and the divine order. What rose through seduction and strategy could also fall through hubris and transgression, and thus the age of empire had begun. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends and family who might be interested in the topic. Consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos. See you in the next video.